Okay, so I made some pretty big claims in the title. Let's now discuss why I think they're justified, and in general, let's talk about these pretty recent developments. We've had a couple dev diaries coming out, we're going to have a couple more dev diaries talking for EU4 developments, but we're going to get to the concepts of why I believe that DLC is probably the last DLC later. Let's address the main thing in the title, EU5, or what at the moment I believe is being referred to as Project Caesar. Now, is Project Caesar EU5 confirmed? No, if it was, there would have been a big Paradox announcement. You would have not heard it from me, you would have heard it from other people. But this is very much starting to look like EU5, and especially with this specific Tinto talk, as they like to call them, especially compared to Tinto Talk 1, I think Tinto Talk 1 left a bit more ambiguous. I think with Tinto Talk 2 and the discussion of the map, it's a lot more likely that what we're looking at right now here is EU5. Now, I'm not going to read this for you. I'm sure that if you're intelligent enough to understand the concept of Europa Universalis, you're probably smart enough to read the dev diary, or Tinto Talk as I want to call it here. But the reason for the idea of why this is EU5, and most likely, is because the way they've currently arranged their sea current locations, and, well, the map setup overall with these sea currents. I believe there's another image of it up there when they talk about Japan. Here we go. See, there's some sea current situations going on over here in the top banner image. This only seems to make sense in the context of Europa Universalis, and specifically the time period of it, because, well, what else can it be? If we're going past 1821, and we're starting to enter the Victorian period, we are going to see still some sail ships like clippers and so on, but you won't design your entire map around it, because we're also going to see the introduction of things like battleships and other steam non-sail based entities that can pretty easily traverse these relatively evident wasteland provinces. So wasteland ocean tiles only make sense in a context where you're not able to traverse the open ocean as freely as you are from the 18th century. Now, to be clear, you can traverse the open ocean in any time period in history, you just wouldn't really stay alive while doing so. You're probably going to get lost in the middle of it. But the other thing that I think is the big suggestion as to why this is most likely EU4 and not, say, I don't know, a Stone Age set games, or the re-release of Imperator, where they decided that Imperator Rome was a bad release, let's just remake it, let's call it Project Caesar, we just re-released Imperator Rome again, is, I believe the main reason for that is the introduction of trade winds. Not really a thing during the Roman time period, especially for places like sailing to Japan and the New World, but they were a lot more important than EU4 gives them credit for. They are present in EU4, it's one of those little mini things a lot of people don't realize. Trade winds are a thing in EU4, but they're very much not a reflected part of the game, and this is another refocus on it where they literally created these sea lanes, which I think is quite a cool concept for the record. It means that in the event of, say, an America fighting the UK, for the UK to blockade America, they actually just need to block, say, 3 or 2 connections east instead of having to blockade the entire coastline, which I think is interesting and provides a lot more opportunities for gameplay navally. But at the same time, I'm not sure if that would actually lead to it, or we just see those as basically ocean highways. But again, that's all for later speculation. A lot of people are probably going to cover it, you don't need to hear it from me here. But I believe that this kind of setup only naturally lends itself towards a time period where there's going to be colonization and people employing the trade winds. And that's kind of only really happening in the EU4 time period. I mean, technically Portugal was doing this a bit earlier. We're talking like in the early 14th century. But I doubt they're going to remake a game that's going to be focusing on the 13th to 14th centuries. That seems a bit too scope, and I think basically assuming that this is EU5 is a pretty safe assumption to make at this point. Furthermore, if we take a look at the provinces earlier, this doesn't indicate it's EU5, to be honest. This is not proof towards that. But I'm starting to see that we're adopting almost a CK3-esque system where the provinces themselves are breaking up into almost little sub-provinces between them, which I think is cool and allows for more emergent peace deal options where you take not even the whole province but like sections of the province, and I think that'll be cool and interesting. But we have to be careful because EU4 notoriously struggled with province count for its performance, and well, I hope if they do a lot of this, there's going to be a lot more provinces naturally in the game. I mean, basically what would just be the province of Stockholm at the moment is looking like a 10th province monstrosity, so the game better be able to handle that in terms of performance for the average person. But again, that's a separate debate, that's just something to be said. Crusader Kings 3 also uses a similar map system with these kind of setups, as does Victoria 3 to the best of my understanding. And they seem to be not the most optimally run things on the planet. They aren't exactly suffering from excessive performance issues in my level of understanding. So with that said, I think assuming it's on the same engine, it's very much looking like it's on the same engine, this should be fine. But yeah, this is my current claim of why I believe this is EU5. The introduction of specifically trade winds and wasteland oceans makes no sense past the 18th century, and makes very little sense before the 18th century as well. I mean, the only way I can see this happening if this is actually a some kind of fever project by the Paradox team where they create a Project Caesar of the Roman Empire never collapsed, and what happens in the 15th century when Rome starts traversing the oceans, which would just be another old history version of EU4, I guess. I mean, that's kind of the only real other option here, and even that is basically a glorified joke. So anyway, that's my claim to why I believe this is pretty much EU5 confirmed. Not much more to that, and I'll be honest, I'm not the only one making these claims. There's a couple of people asking genuine questions, and they're pretty good questions, to be fair. I'm for once impressed with the quality of the questions asked on the forum. But there we go. There's the classic, you know, EU5 reference there, and I believe if I keep going down for a bit, there we go. Another, this is EU5. I don't think they're fooling a lot of people by not stating the release, and I guess you might be asking, okay, but if they're talking about this, why they're not announcing this as EU5? And let's not forget, they do still have a DLC to sell us, the last DLC, as I believe, or will very probably be the last DLC. Depends on how long this takes them, this dev diary, Tinto talk takes them to get out before they actually start announcing a game. And let's bear in mind, if you knew that DLC was going to be coming to a game, say EU4, and then that's going to be the last EU4 DLC, you're probably a lot less likely to buy the DLC. It doesn't apply to people like me. I'm going to buy whatever they sell me simply so I can make content on it, and well, I love EU4. But with that said, for the average person, they're probably a bit less likely to buy a DLC when they know that there's a brand new game coming out of it a bit later. So it kind of makes sense for them to both insinuate that but not confirm it. With that said, though, why is the current DLC that's going to be coming out soon going to be the last DLC as I believe it? Well, because to me, that DLC feels very much like Domination, the bit of Domination that they didn't finish the previous DLC. And Domination, in its inherent construction, is very much a rounding off the game DLC. What do I mean by that? Well, let's consult our favorite friend, Maps. There we go, we flipped. Here is my very, as you can clearly see, load up in Paint, Professionalism 101 version of the world map. And the reason I've got it up here is because I have to ask you, Paradox, in the very recently change of direction, they focused, instead of releasing new mechanics, which is probably a good thing, because there's a lot of mechanics already present in EU4, there's been a focus on adding more content to specific areas. And I'm not going to lie, they've kind of got most of the planet covered. We'll go through it in a bit, but especially with Domination, you've had a lot of areas that were very popular revisited and kind of polished up and brought up to the same standards, with the UK getting another mission tree, France getting a mission tree, Iberia, Spain getting a whole bunch of content. I mean, Austria now is a very popular tag, getting a whole bunch of content. Mughals already had a bunch of content, they're getting a whole bunch of new things. The Ottomans getting revisited, Ming getting content. A lot of these countries, again, and your Japans, they're all getting content because they're big popular destinations. Instead of focusing on a specific area, like something like the Leviathan DLC, which focused on Southeast Asia, India, and kind of like, I guess Oceania would be the best way of approaching it. But instead of focusing on an area like that, or for example, I can't remember the name, I believe it was Origins DLC that focused specifically on Africa, they just kind of went around the entire world and just, like, you get content, and you get content. I'm going to make this pen a bit thicker so you can probably see it on your screen. You get content, and you get content, and you get content, instead of going, alright, this area is neglected, let's give it content. So with that said, what else do they have to do now when it comes to the world? What area is neglected enough to justify a DLC? That's probably not going to be covered here. Well, at this point, they're giving countries that had content, we're looking at Austria, even more of it, and even relatively neglected areas like Italy, which had decent missions, I believe, in the pre-formables, like the Tuscan and Milanese missions were pretty decent. Finally, we're getting Venice missions, we're getting Italy missions, so we're getting a lot more fleshed out for those areas. And what this kind of means is that they're pretty much out of room as well for adding new things. We see a return to this in the same way that CK2 had, with their last DLC being Holy Fury, I believe, where they kind of revisited what was the big Crusader Kings 2 mechanic, the Crusades. They reworked Crusades with this big DLC on Crusades, and then went ahead and released CK3. And with EU4, what was the big mechanic for the EU4? rising major powers. They revisited the rising major powers, the Ottomans, the English, the French, the Spanish, and all those things, and gave them a bunch of content. Gave a bunch of content to Russia that was rising the spirit, for example, and then just kind of called it a day. We're now seeing a continuation of that again, with Netherlands getting content, Austria getting content, Italy getting a formal mission tree, etc., etc., etc. So I guess the reason I have this map up is to, well, discuss who is not going to have content at the end of this to make a DLC, because England's covered. Scotland, I'm going to say, is... They could revisit it and add a bit more to it, but Scotland, for the most part, is good. Ireland definitely is a candidate for revision, but Ireland is one of the countries / I guess tags that has relatively little content. But compare that to the state of most countries, say, a year or two ago. Ireland has a unique government reform at tier 1, and they have at least a mission tree, so it's not bad. They're not entirely neglected. So it's... could be better, I guess, but... I mean, basically what I'm saying is there's space to revisit them with the DLC, but it's fine to leave them as is, in my opinion. So that's kind of the England area I believe we can just, in general, tick off. Ooh, is there any ticker? Nope. And then Spain is definitely good. Castile, Portugal, they got enough content. France, you're good. Germany, Prussia got a bunch of things. I think that's the kind of North Germany content there. That's definitely good. There's a bunch of other small Bavarian tags that have enough content, I think, to get by, and especially with Austria getting a lot of content, I think that area is good. Italy could use a better end tag formable, but it's definitely good. And Austria-Hungary kind of tends to dominate the Hungary-Balkans area, as do the Ottomans, so this area as well, I believe, is good enough. And Albania, for crying out loud, has their own mission tree, not that extensive, but contains their own unique buffs until the end of the game, and again, good enough content considering their historical significance. Scandinavia, of course, Paradox won't neglect them, I think they're good. Russia definitely is good, probably one of the strongest mission trees in the game right now. They definitely don't need a revisit. You kind of end up in a weird situation, I find, with Lithuania and Ruthenia, in terms of the formables in this area and the Baltic area. I mean, Livonia and Lithuania, Livonian Order and the Teutonic Order are definitely good on content, let's be clear here. And Poland is certainly an excellent tag as well. Lithuania, I guess you could argue for it, but Ruthenia you can also argue for. But at the end of the day, Ruthenia didn't exactly exist during this time period, and they already have a mission and relatively unique government reform, so it's a bit weird to ask for more. Same can kind of be said for Lithuania. I mean, they did exist, but they were under Union for most of it. Under the Commonwealth, for lack of a better word. I mean, saying that someone was under the Commonwealth is kind of inaccurate. That's not kind of how the Commonwealth worked. But from a gameplay perspective, they're under the Commonwealth. They don't exactly have a lot in terms of concept decisions, but they have enough that if you're playing Lithuania, you want to do the Lithuanian-Polish Commonwealth and do it that way around, there's still enough for you to go for, I think. So overall, I'm happy to take this part of the map off. Ottomans and Karaman and Rum, content-wise, yeah, you're good, especially after the recent updates. Arabia, literally a massive focus on the updates, same for the Mamluks. Mamluks used to be very much neglected, that was fixed. Persia was very much neglected, recently fixed, incredibly strong. Persia probably a strong contender for Russia for strongest tag these days. Mughals, Timmy is getting missions, but they already had them, so as far as I'm concerned, that's about as tickable as it gets. Same can be said for India. India has, I mean, it could be better, but they have a lot of content there, specifically a lot of religions, a lot of monuments, a lot of unique government stuff, a lot of cool missions for everyone involved. That's pretty much an easy tick in my books. Hordes and this area here north of China. Mongols, Yuan, there's Horde content over there. There's, yeah, I mean, you have your unique formables, Baccarat. I think they're also good enough. I mean, you could argue for a Horde DLC potentially, but I think they're in a good enough position to move on. Same can be said for the China formables from this area and the China itself. I think that's all just one massive good tick, as is Korea and Japan now, especially. They are, with domination, Japan and Korea got excellent mission trees that are good now. Southeast Asia had Leviathan, and this is one of the areas that got treated quite nicely by Leviathan. I think that's a tick, that's good. Basically, Asia, for the most part, is covered. You get into Malaysia, yep. Indonesia, good formables over there. Sunda, Cloves, good stuff over here. And here's we get to a weird situation. Is that, weirdly enough, content-wise, New Zealand, these guys over here, I mean, whatever is going on in Samoa, Fiji, because of Leviathan, and especially Australia, have loads of great content in an area that no one's playing. Let's be honest, no one's actually playing in Australia. You've given content to an AI tag to explore. And granted, it was broken for all of the time, and maybe it was broken on release, but compared to all the other things, if I had access to player data, I'd say that these areas are very rarely played. Even the people that I knew that played Leviathan on release said they did like one New Zealand campaign, and that was it. I very much doubt that unless you're someone like Lace who's suffering through a Australia campaign for the views or something of that similar, you're actually playing in this area, which I think is a shame, but it's more of a consequence of the geography and not a consequence of game design. There's just not too much going on here. And I guess compared to somewhere like playing in Alaska, where the entire challenge is geography, once you've left your initial region and you're in a position to move into, you move into Malaya, which not only has a lot of content, it's also really rich, so it's not like you're... Once you move out of your local area, you're fine to play the game relatively normally, I feel like. So it's a very weird situation to be in. But yeah, no, in terms of content and DLC, you're not going to be able to get another DLC out of this area, especially with Hawaii getting a whole bunch of missions and all of the other things. Now let's move on to the other areas. Could you get another DLC out of the Congo area? Not really. I think a lot of that stuff is done here. Maybe I'm going to put a yellow tick on the, like, Kilworm, Mutapa areas. They do have some formables, they have a bit of stuff, but I can see that area being revisited. The issue is I don't know if that's going to be enough of an area to revisit, because it already has some stuff. It's a very similar situation to Ireland, where there's enough going on, but not... Like, you could add to it, I guess, and especially for Madagascar, I think Madagascar has some things going for it, but is really neglected. But if you want to take a look at the area as a whole, especially when you consider Ethiopia and Jewish mechanics being added, if you want to take the two provinces that are Jewish at the game start and do a Jewish one culture and so on. Again, for a religion that literally has only two provinces, there's a lot of mechanics existing for it there. Ethiopia has a lot of mechanics, and so I think that area is pretty good. Maybe this area is a touch neglected, but overall, I mean, when you consider the tags on the side of it and the fact there's not too much, I think overall a green tick here is not too undeserved. Mali has a whole bunch of cool content, so Sub-Saharan Africa is a tick. And then you have, what? In Sub-Saharan Africa here, Dahomey, even for some fancy achievement stuff. I mean, overall, I think it's a good enough area, especially given its relative impact on the global stage at this point, which is not trivial, let's be clear, but it's not exactly world-leading empire. It's cool enough to play, and there's enough unique stuff, but it's not in need of another DLC. Now, an area that I have probably moved around that you've noticed is actually going to be North Africa. If I'm ever going to be proved wrong and they do add another DLC, it's either going to be part of some Italy content or some kind of Italy dev diary where they give this area. But one area that's definitely in need of it is, I think, Morocco, Tunis, and especially the Mazab, Fazan, these areas. These guys are struggle-uggling. Their best kind of content is going into Spain and restoring Al-Andalus. Otherwise, on their own, they just kind of have a very out-of-date mission tree considering their relative endurance as tags. I mean, Tunis, Morocco kind of endured for quite a while, and I mean, they are very much neglected in my opinion, and their age shows a lot more than something like the Irish tree, which, while more concise, I think shows its age a lot less, especially with things like Ireland being... They survive games a lot less than something like Tunis and Morocco do, so I think if there is actually still a neglected area, it's probably going to be here in the Morocco-Tunis location. That, however, with that said, it's important to recognize there is still content for them. They have a couple small missions, so it's not like it's literally the default I don't have any missions area. And with that said, actually another thing I've almost noticed to forget, because, yeah, there's a very unique kind of government setup, but honestly, these guys really should just get a rework. The Siberian migratory tribes, the Chukchi, those people over there. Yeah, no, I mean, their government type is literally broken in that they can migrate, but they don't have the requirement to stay in one province because they're so neglected and generally irrelevant. They are pretty much non-functional as countries. And I don't mean to say that as in their country's really been. I mean, quite literally, mechanically, they function very badly. No one's complaining about it, because how many times have you loaded up the game of EU4 and wanted to play a tribe in Siberia? Exactly. So, maybe, but I'm not exactly seeing a Siberian tribe DLC sell out. With that said, we move on to the New World. And New World, if it wasn't for the announcements in the newest upcoming DLC, I would have put on a yellow. Like, Inca could use more content, Maya could absolutely use more content, Aztec could use a rework. With what we've seen in Dev Diary so far, I'm just going to be putting green ticks over here. Definitely enough. I mean, they've given a New World nation the Siberian frontiers, or access to them, so... Well, they haven't called them Siberian frontiers, they call them American frontiers, but yeah, absolutely. It'll be cool, I think, to give that to the US, actually, to rework it, but that brings us to another area that could definitely get DLCs. The colonial tags. I'm not talking the colonial nations, because weirdly enough, they get a bunch of relatively unique stuff, like being a private enterprise and so on. But once you actually become independent as them, or for whatever kind of gameplay, so if you're playing as Brazil, or playing as the USA, or playing as Canada, or something like that, that's just, yeah, red. They are very, very lacking. The US is the most, or playing as actual Mexico, as the colonial nation releasable. They absolutely need a a rework, for lack of a better word, because there is just no content there. I've also realized now in hindsight that I was going to put green ticks for good and then red crosses for bad, but I've just kind of defaulted to the bad tick everywhere, so you know what? We're rolling with it now. With that said, yeah, I mean, when you look at this and you consider what areas of the world got covered and are relevant, you can introduce what? And to be clear, the other natives in North America I'm going to put on a yellow, so potentially, but they did say they're not touching natives again, so I think this yellow is very much wishful thinking. Overall, though, considering how much they played, I think, to be honest, as for in Paradox size, I'm going to say that they're green good enough. You're going to get, what, a Colonial Nations and Morocco DLC? I mean, to be fair, I think a USA, Brazil, Mexico, Colonial Nation releasable focused DLC could probably do quite well. And you could shove, say, some stuff here for the Siberian natives and some stuff here for Morocco and Tunis just on the side randomly as part of the free update potentially. But I don't necessarily think they will. They have been very anti doing that, and in a weird way, those kind of tags are antithesis to the point of EU4, namely that you build up a large colonial empire which requires a lot of investment. You have to invest into it. And if you know they're going to revolt later anyway, you're just better off not investing into it and invading your European neighbors. So it's kind of punishing colonization, and given that a large part of this game is colonization, they probably are not that incentivized to, well, punish it. So there we go. With that said, yeah, I mean, I just don't see the area of where they're going to get an extra DLC worth of content out of. The only way I can really see is if they rework the Native American nations, which, if they want to prove me wrong and get a DLC reworking America, Brazil, Mexico, Canada, etc., I'll take it. This is an area I'll be wrong to be happy over. This is something I'll be happy to be wrong over. But I don't think I see that happening. And we're definitely seeing a very much a CK2 Holy Fury-esque attempt of rejigging all the nations to be good enough so they can call this project of EU4 complete and move on to EU5. But there we go, that's my speculation. At the end of the day, this is all just a well-educated guess. So if you enjoyed this relatively different type of video, a bit of a ramble, or if it's your first time here, hello. With that all said, a like would be appreciated, the standard stuff, and if you haven't subscribed already, a sub would be amazing. But that's all I have time for you today. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.